let me introduce you to the man of the hour. The speaker that we are thrilled to have today is Dale Curd. Dale is a certified executive leadership coach, a published author, a counselor, and a farmer. I have had the pleasure of working with Dale last year during the FCC Young Farmer Summit, which some of you may have attended. So you get to see him again. And for all of our new friends here today, we get to welcome this incredible guy. Please join me in welcoming Dale Curd.
Hey, Katelyn.
Hi, friend. How are you?
I'm doing really, really well. Thank you so much for having me. What a great and important topic for today.
Absolutely. I'm so excited for you to be here, Dale. And we have a lot to talk about. So we are going to get down to business.
Okay.
Today, we're going to be talking about mental health and what that looks like. And we're going to have a conversation and provide our audience with tools that are necessary to start to overcome the challenges that people can face and different helpful resources that people can access when it comes to mental health. So, Dale, when does just those bad feelings or feeling bad actually become a mental health problem?
I love that as a question. I really because there's some things inherent in your question that I think we really need to put on the table. The first is that we all, and I say all of us who are involved in agriculture and farming, we all have good days, we all have bad days. It is very normal in life, or it is very normal to have a life that has ups and downs. And I don't think you can overstate that to begin with. We will have periods of time when we feel bad, and we will have periods of time where we feel kind of apathetic or disinterested. We're going to have times when we're going to feel sad. We're going to feel angry. That's normal life. One of my favorite authors, M. Scott Peck, who wrote The Road Less Traveled, has this great opening that I'm going to paraphrase or adjust for farming. And that is, farming is difficult. Farm life is difficult. And when we cease to see it differently, when we stop resisting that it is going to be difficult, it ceases to be so. And I think there's a truism in that if we expect that we're not going to have bad days, then we're going to suffer when we actually do have bad days. So we all have bad days, we all have good days. But when does that become something that we should really be concerned about in terms of mental health? Let me just say again, like off the top, about 10% of the population have a diagnosable mental health disorder. So that's 1 in 10, let's say, right? The rest of us, 90% of us, let's say, are dealing with concerns, issues, behaviors that are the result of external circumstances and their influence on our lives, or conditioning. So things that have happened to us since we were little, growing up, and we've adapted or we've tried to adapt to those. Those are not necessarily diagnosable mental health disorders. They are challenges, for sure, mental health challenges, and they can present themselves like a mental health disorder. But the difference between, say, the 90% and the 10% is that the 10% typically needs some level of escalated intervention, whether that be healthcare practitioner involvement, whether that be medication and persistent medication, like consistent and persistent medication, or let's say higher levels of treatment interventions. For most of us, what we're talking about are times when, let's say, for instance, feeling bad or feeling sad. And, sadness is probably one of the harder things that people have to deal with, because sadness, when it persists, can turn into apathy. And once it becomes kind of apathy or disinterest, then you're heading towards a depression. Generally speaking, when a symptom or series of symptoms either escalates in intensity or becomes more frequent or longer in duration, that's when we want to start thinking about what we're experiencing and what we're feeling in terms of, there must be something going on with my mental health. And I say that because I think there's a self-awareness aspect here that I really want to convey today. That's a big part of addressing our mental health. The more aware we can become of what's going on inside our heads and how our mental health is and mood is progressing, the more choice we have about how we can respond and seek help and support.
Right. Well, and I think the part about knowing yourself and knowing when it's gone a little bit too far, when you have to start reaching out, is super important. And, you know, when it goes beyond seeing other people, when do they need to reach out for help? And these are signs and symptoms that if we feel in ourselves, maybe we can help recognize others not feeling well. My next question for you is, what are some of the obvious signs when it comes to depression and anxiety and challenges with substances, whether that's for ourselves or for the people that we love?
Again, super great question. And a lot of this is about noticing. One of the things that fascinates me when I got into farming and meeting other farmers was how much observational knowledge they had acquired over their lifetime in agriculture. What I mean by that is they could tell by the feel of the land, the moisture content. They could tell by watching animals whether the general health of that animal. There was a level of observational attunement about the things that were their responsibility to care for or to grow that, in my experience, didn't translate when it came to understanding themselves. And I want to turn on that power of observational attunement, if you will, or being able to look at ourselves so that we can start to observe things, changes in our own behavior or changes in our own moods, and use those as early warning signs, not only for ourselves, but for others that we care for, or in our communities and in our families. So one of the first things that I would say, there's kind of a quick 10, if you will, generally speaking. First thing is mood swings. We want to pay attention to any kind of sudden or extreme shifts in mood, prolonged periods of sadness, prolonged or intense irritability, or even sudden outbursts or unusual ill-timed, or what's the word I'm looking for? Incongruent. So an event happens and somebody has an unusual burst of happiness, sort of an excited sort of kind of happiness. You're looking for real significant changes in mood. Now, again, just a caveat here. If somebody's grieving, for instance, the loss of a loved one, or they're grieving the loss of say a piece of property, or they've had a big financial hit, or they've had a sudden change to lifestyle, guess what? They're going to grieve, and they're going to grieve that change as well. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's a mood swing that you should necessarily be concerned about. It might be that you're just grieving and you're sad for a period of time. So when we talk about these mood swings, we're talking about sudden and extreme shifts. And you're going to hear this theme over and over again in terms of what to look out for. Changes in sleep patterns. We are a chronically underslept society, more so in agriculture, I find. If you just anecdotally, when I've asked other neighbors, how many hours of sleep you're getting, most people are getting somewhere between 4 to 5.5 hours of sleep. And that's not even great quality sleep. That's just what they would identify as, I don't remember being awake. Changes in sleep patterns are a big indicator of something happening. And what I mean by that is, are we sleeping too much? Are we sleeping too little? Are we experiencing insomnia over periods of time, like a duration of time? Or are we oversleeping regularly? So for instance, one of the things that's quite interesting in retirement, as an example, is that people will often have a big effect in their sleep. They'll It's almost like because they've lost the relevance of the job, they've lost the community that they used to see every single day, that they're grieving, in a way, grieving, and it shows up immediately in their sleep patterns. So that's one we want to look out for. Appetite changes. A lot of people, myself included, are emotional eaters. So when I go through something emotionally, my appetite changes. Stress, I tend to eat less or not at all. And when I'm feeling sad or I'm mourning something, I tend to eat a lot. And so me knowing that, me being aware of that, and my partner also observing what I'm eating and how I'm eating is a really excellent sign that there might be something happening that I should think about and address. Social withdrawal. We are a social species. We're a connected species. Some people would say we're a pair bonded species, human beings. And when we're not feeling emotionally secure, when we're not feeling emotionally stable, when we're having something going on inside our heads that it's really difficult for us to manage, one of our first impulses is to pull away socially. It is to isolate ourselves. So when you come across somebody who's usually even somewhat community based or somewhat chatty or somewhat conversational, and suddenly that stops or it shifts and they're isolating more, that's a pretty clear indication that they might be trying to manage something. Loss of interest in activities, that's another big one. So somebody who, say, was involved in not so much a hobby, but but maybe they were meeting a social group once a week, or they were getting together for curling or something like that, and suddenly there's just less interest in it. They're not talking about it anymore. There's a kind of general apathy that's creeping in that individual. That's something that is a big indicator. Increased anxiety. And I know we're going to talk more about anxiety, but somebody who's exhibiting high levels of heightened anxiety or nervousness, excessive worrying, those are hallmark signs that there's something shifting for that person in terms of their mental health. And then the others would be poor concentration, physical symptoms, unexplained kind of aches and pains and general kind of soreness and stiffness. That can be a physical manifestation of something happening with a person's mental health. Certainly substance abuse. This is a big one for this time of year, right? A lot of people with the reduction in daylight, with with the intensity of the farming season, shifting now to everything's in the elevators and the silos. And so now what am I doing with my time? This is a time when people tend to turn to substances. So that 1 or 2 beers becomes a 6-pack, a 12-pack, or they're turning to something even harsher or more escalated in terms of its severity. Those are things you're going to want to pay attention to. And then with depression and anxiety, the last one that I think is really important is changes in self-care. When we feel good about who we are and we feel content with life, we take care of ourselves and we take care of the things that are important to us. And then on the opposite side, in reverse, when our mental health is affected and we're wrestling with something and trying to manage something, self-care falls off very quickly. And so that's a strong indicator that there might be something going on.
Right. And these are things that obviously I feel like are sometimes easier to point out for other people versus ourselves. It's, looking inward sometimes can be a little bit more difficult than looking outward.
We're not the best observers of ourselves. It's true, right? We sometimes it takes somebody noticing us and how we're interacting, and the 10 things that I went through, changes in our behavior, changes in our mood, changes in our level of engagement. It takes that to sort of tweak us to the idea that there might be something going on. As a species, we're pretty resilient when it comes to change. We're not big fans of change, human beings. We like comfort, we like reassurance, we like security. And because of that, we tend to develop pretty significant blind spots to our own behavior. And so it's difficult. It's and when I coach an individual, it's one of the three pillars that I put forward as a model, and that is self-awareness, self-management, self-improvement. And I try to explain it really simply. The more that you can be aware of, the more that I can be aware of about myself, what I think, what I feel, how I behave, the more choice I have about how I choose to manage that. And really what we want to do, and when it comes to managing, is manage in healthy ways, not adaptive ways that might be sabotaging our physical and emotional and mental health. And then once I'm managing things for a while, I'm probably going to arrive at a point where I want to actually improve something. I mean, we see this over and over again when people make significant life changes, that they start, if you will, sort of a 1.0 version of themselves. They learn as much as they can about that core 1.0 programming of who they are. And then they manage the things that aren't working for them anymore, or they manage the difficulties. And then at a certain point, they go, I just don't want to manage this anymore. I actually want to change this. I want to create something better and healthier for myself. And that's the sort of upgrade to 2.0. That's a self-improvement. And we see that all over the place, and especially when it comes to things like smoking cessation, alcohol reduction cessation, substance abuse cessation. We see people making those decisions that once they become aware, they manage, then they improve.
Right. What are some examples, if you could just give us a couple of examples for ourselves, and if we have concerns of others, what are some soft startups for conversations to have with folks? If you have a loved one that you're concerned about, what's a soft startup that you can use to kind of break the ice, if you will?
Excellent question. There's let's just acknowledge that it's really difficult to do that with someone you care about. Right. Let's also acknowledge that if you're noticing something about their behavior or about how their lifestyle is changing, or they might be doing something that's harmful to themselves and other people, let's be honest about how hard that is to do and manage our own feelings first. It is supremely difficult, on top of that, to be non-judgmental about approaching them. No matter how much you love a person, it's really hard to strip out your own fear, your own anxiousness, your own worry, and your own judgments, to make the approach to them an invitation, or to make it sound compassionate, or to make it sound like you care. Of course we care, but to make it sound like you care, that's the real work. Right. Some examples of soft approaches, depending on the behavior, I like to start with, I call it the compassion sandwich, right? It's a variation on another kind of sandwich, but I'm going to call it the compassion sandwich right now. The compassion sandwich would be, I'm going to acknowledge you for something that I really love about you. Then I'm going to put in the middle of that something that I've observed that for me is a concern. And then I'm going to put another layer, you will, another piece of bread. That is how I really care about you, and I'm here for you. So that might sound like, hey, you're a good pal, you're an awesome friend, and I really care about you, and I really enjoy the time we get together. I notice that when we're socializing, I'm good at 2 or 3 beers. You tend to go to 12, 15, and then the conversation starts. I can't really connect with you anymore. I can't really talk to you when you go that far. And I really want to spend a lot of time with you. Like, I enjoy spending time with you. Is there any help I can give you? Have you noticed that there's a change for you around how you're drinking? Right. That might be an example of that compassion sandwich.
Right. Well, and even having a physical object that we can all remember of a compassion sandwich then we'll know when we're going through that conversation, we can make it a little lighter because we'll remember Dale and his compassion sandwich.
I appreciate that. I want to give you another example too, because this is really hard to do the more intimate the relationship. What I mean by that, it's one thing for two close friends to say it to each other. It's another thing for somebody, for a partner who may be in a long-term relationship, who's observing changes, let's say in sleep behavior or in substance consumption or mood, let's say, to bring that up in a way that doesn't immediately put the person on the defensive. And I always say lead with caring, not caretaking. Don't make the person powerless by what you're about to say or do for them, but lead with caring. Hey, I'm concerned with you. About you. I really love you. I notice your sleeping is changing. I'm not going to add the more or less, or I just notice your sleep is changing. How are you feeling?
Right.
Make it a question rather than a judgment or a statement. How are you feeling?
Right. And it allows the person to open up and share if they've personally noticed if anything has changed. And, it, like you said, it's a soft start, and it makes it a little less awkward to have these conversations. And we were talking about, the harder conversations to have. Maybe that's with your spouse or with your parents or your in-laws or whatever. There's so many different layers of family farming. But can you elaborate whether there are noticeable differences between individuals of different genders and how they might experience mental health challenges differently?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So there's some tropes, if you will. There's sort of things that are generalizations. I certainly anecdotally, I can. These have been evidenced for me. There is sort of a generalized research on what I'm about to say. So if we talk about how the different genders tend to deal with mental health concerns, let's say, or changes in their mental health, the thing that we have to understand is what that person is really dealing with is a sense of vulnerability. So anytime there's something that happens to us physically, emotionally, or mentally that we don't expect and that we don't have an answer for, we go to this really deep sense of insecurity and worry and a sense that we're vulnerable. And vulnerability is handled very differently by men and women specifically. Men tend to isolate and shut down in terms of vulnerability. And a lot of that is because men are achievement conditioned in our society. So any sign of vulnerability is paramount to being socially excluded. It's like if you're the weak link in the chain, then the whole chain is no longer right. And men, I'd love men to question that more and more, because believe me, we need men to open up, and we need men to talk to each other, let alone to partners or children, or we need them to talk to each other, because this sense of vulnerability and how they handle it leads to some tragic outcomes. For instance, men are more likely to, when if they're moving towards suicide, they're more likely to contemplate a violent end of life, or to take or to end their life violently than, say, women will. So how men handle that vulnerability, typically there's usually through isolation, some form of isolation. So they'll stop talking, they'll pull themselves away, pull themselves back, they'll be less engaged in terms of community or family. I see this all the time in law enforcement when I'm working with law enforcement officers. They tend to they have a sort of a sympathetic nervous response and then a parasympathetic nervous response. So sympathetic is highly escalated when they're on the job. And I would say the same is true for farming. Farming and agriculture is a lifestyle that is full of constant changes in the external environment, right? Whether that be nature, what you grow, what you care for, the economics of that, the financial back end of that or front end of that, everything is constantly changing. And men respond, whether they're first responders or whether they're farmers, they respond quite similarly. They tend to be all engaged and hyper vigilant when they're on. And then when they're not on and in immediate need, they tend to pull back and isolate, almost go into a cave, if you will, emotionally and mentally. That's a big, big difference. And getting them to talk about that and to feel like they can come out and open up, that's half or three quarters of the battle. That said, when it comes to conditions or disorders like depression, we know that women tend to be more or suffer more with depression than men do. And there are lots of theories as to why that is. So I think there's a bias, again, culturally, that it's hard for women to talk about being unengaged in life. I think it's really difficult for women to talk about maybe the big feelings that are underneath depression, because that's a truism about depression. Depression is characterized by an absence of attachment or engagement. And that's typically because if the person does attach or engage, there's some big feelings that come with that. And those are what they're trying to avoid. And for a lot of women, it's anger, believe it or not. And I don't know if we've done a great job as a society in helping women be comfortable in their anger or being able to be angry about the things that are really making them angry. And so they tend to suppress or repress that down. And that leads them to suffer with depression more so than, certainly more so than men. We find men will turn more to hard substances than women as a way of coping. I mean, those are just some sort of general differences.
Right. Well, and to hear those differences and to put it into perspective of how we deal with things differently, if you have someone in your life and you don't understand why they act the way that they do, just knowing some of those things and knowing those differences can help make sense.
And there's nuances there. You're absolutely right, Katelyn. There's nuances in that too. There's nuances to the family that person comes from, and how they how open they are as a family to talk about the things that are going on with them, right? As individuals, like what's the family code? Is this a family that opens up and talks about everything, puts everything on the table? Or is this a family that doesn't talk about anything that's affecting them, that's too shameful or too embarrassing, or they don't have the tools to be able to talk about it? There's a lot of that intergenerational code, if you will, family code that gets passed down, where people just don't develop the skills to be able to talk about the things that are really affecting them and that they're trying to manage. So that nuance is certainly really big. I also think you see this more so in places like elementary school and secondary school, where there's a social code or a social stigma about appearing vulnerable or different. And that tends to suppress a person's ability to want to get out there and talk about what's really going on them or for them, or to seek help. So these nuances are super important as well.
Right. Well, we talk about stigma, and we talk about, in the world of agriculture and farmers, we are the salt of the earth. We, take all of the punches and we keep going. And there's the stigma that if you don't do that, or if you're struggling, get off the farm.
There is, it's really interesting, because in my experience, the farmers and people in agriculture that I've met are some of the most resilient people I have ever come across in my entire life, especially those ones that come from generational farming setups. There is an understanding that they are born into and grow up, that, like I said off the top of the presentation today, that life is difficult. This is a difficult job that we do. It's a difficult lifestyle that we do. We experience life, we experience death, we experience prosperity, we experience economic downturns, we experience lots of change, environmental change, right? That's a big factor, especially in the last 10, 15 years. And there's an understanding that we roll with that to a certain extent. The other side of that resilience, however, is a kind of set jaw stubbornness to, and I don't think it's intentional. I think it's just part of character and personality that is resistant to change. And especially when it comes to observing themselves and making changes. And I think it's softening a bit. I think certainly those individuals that I met at the Young Farmer Summit last year, working and presenting alongside with you, there was some real openness to talk about mental health, almost like physical health, as it should be, right? This is why I got into coaching. I got into coaching because it's a very different paradigm than counseling. Coaching is looking at the mental health of an individual and looking for optimization. Where can this individual optimize how their thinking takes place, or the structures in their thinking, and how can we remove limitations that are there? That's why I got into coaching. It fits really well with the pragmatic mindset of farmers. The difficulty in working with farmers is getting them to open up and just admit that there's something they should look at or could look at.
Right.
And so I think it's the stubbornness. And again, it's not intentional stubbornness. And I don't want to, I'm sure some people are going to comment about me using the word stubborn. There's a mindset, a fixed mindset, that I think is the other side of this really positive characteristic, which is the resilience.
Right. We're not stubborn, Dale. I promise. Dale, you've put together some incredible resources for us today, and I want to make sure that we have enough time to go through all of them, because you did such a great job in presenting these different slides and putting them into different categories. So they're going to put them up on the screen for us real quick, but a quick reminder for those of you who are taking notes today, if you miss any of this, we will be sending this out in our post-event email. So on the slides, Dale, can you speak to each of these categories and the different resources that you found that you wanted to share with us?
So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. So when I was thinking about this, I thought about it from the perspective of getting help now. So there's something I'm noticing about myself, or somebody has come to me, somebody who cares about me has come to me and said they've noticed something, and it's at a level where I believe I need to get help now, or I love someone and care for someone, and I believe their behavior or the symptoms that I'm observing, this is a situation that is heading towards a crisis, if not already in a crisis. So the first set of resources that I put together would fall under this banner of Get Help Now. Okay, so Wellness Together Canada, it's a great resource, and lots of information, assessments, but you have the ability to talk to a counselor immediately. You can book that online. I love that and you'll see there's a few more of these that are like this. The ability, especially for people who live in rural communities or outside of rural communities, quite a distance from any kind of major center, access to mental health and adequate mental health care is a huge factor. So resources like Wellness Together Canada allows you to go online and book a conversation with a counselor right away. Farmer Wellness Initiative is another version of that, specifically in Ontario. Do More Agriculture has crisis contacts, so you can go online right away, and the beautiful section of the site gives you the ability to talk to somebody if you're in crisis right away, and it has a great directory of crisis contacts. BetterHelp is probably one of the Psychology Today, BetterHelp, they're probably two of the leading online platforms right now for counseling and specifically psychotherapy and different types of psychotherapy. So these are international directories. Psychology Today certainly covers Canada and the US. BetterHelp, definitely North America, a little bit, I believe, of the UK as well. But it's a great opportunity to speak to someone right away. What I like about BetterHelp is that the fees are pretty manageable. They're not excessive. I think it's something in the neighborhood of $60 for a session that you can book with someone, and it's pretty rapid to be able to do that. Layla Care is a smaller operation, similar idea, where you can book a session with someone fairly quickly. It tends to be more sort of feminine focused, but not necessarily. They have a lot of counselors of both genders, and they cover a wide spectrum of issues and concerns. I like the fact that you can talk to a counselor right away. Kids Help Phone is by far the best resource for any child in a crisis situation. They have so you can, in terms of text connect to 686868. They also offer a service for teens and young adults called Crisis Text Line, which is a text-based service. And you literally, you reach out and you're with someone in seconds, if not minutes. And that's really good for in-the-moment crisis support. One Stop Talk is a great youth-focused resource, immediate resource for support. Canada Drug Rehab. This is a directory of public and private alcohol treatment, drug rehab, and detox program centers in Canada. This is really important. I can tell you as someone who works in mental health that I'm often asked for referrals, especially for loved ones by clients and patients, for referrals to drug rehab. It's not something that I have at my fingertips. This is an excellent resource for finding those centers and those programs to help the people that we love. Drug cocktails, this is a newer one. This is a resource where you can input a pharmaceutical or a street drug and anything that's been taken in combination with that, and it will tell you essentially what will happen and what to do. It's an amazing resource. And I put this up here because there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation when it comes to mixing alcohol and pharmaceutical drugs, and especially street drugs. And this is one of the best resources I've seen for giving people information about what's going to happen to someone, and what's the course of treatment or immediate treatment when they combine alcohol with certain cocktails of drugs.
Right. There are so many resources on here. And like you said, these ones were for the Get Help Now. The next slide that you had is more of if you're looking for more information to learn more about mental health in general and places to start.
Right. So exactly. So again, coming back to the sort of the three pillars that I really believe in, right? Self-awareness, self-management, self-improvement. This resource list is where you would go to learn specifically about things that you believe are affecting you or someone you care and love about. So Mood Disorder Society of Canada, the best resource, I believe, when it comes to understanding what a mood disorder is, the various types of diagnosable mood disorders, and approaches to treatment. Anxiety Canada, a one-stop when it comes to anxiety. It's one of the best places to go to best understand how many different types of anxiety there are, when anxiety, whether it be a generalized anxiety disorder, when it's something that you really need to be concerned about and you need to talk to someone right away. CAMH, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, one of the best in the country when it comes to information, resources, and treatment protocols and treatment avenues. Peer Support Canada, amazing resource for peer support groups that are issue-based. And I am a firm believer in peer support, especially expert facilitated peer support, because I really believe in the notion that we can help ourselves if we're in communities that support us. And this is where you find those communities at Peer Support Canada. Depression Hurts, very much like Anxiety Canada. It's a one-stop when it comes to better understanding and developing a lot of knowledge about what depression really is. Mind Beacon and Heads Up Guys, really great support for young men when it comes to understanding mental health. Tends to have a bit of a positive psychology bent, but it's super helpful information, really great information. Canadian Network for Mood and Anxiety Treatments, again, a tremendous resource for better understanding mood disorders, different types of anxiety, and when anxiety is something that needs treating right away or urgently. Canadian Centre for Substance Use and Addiction, it's, again, like a one-stop when it comes to substance abuse behaviors, what to look out for, the different types depending on the substances, and really a really solid understanding of addiction, what addiction really is. There's a big shift in our understanding of addiction recently, where we're starting to see addiction, and I don't know why it took us so long to get here, we're starting to see addiction as the individual's attempt to adapt to something that's been going on for them mentally, emotionally. And they've chosen a pathway that in the beginning offered them some relief, and now that's become a dependence. And we need to really shift our view of addiction, and the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction is a great place to start that. And then Families for Addiction Recovery is a tremendous resource for the people who are supporting and loving someone with an addiction, because that takes a lot of conversation, that takes a lot of support, and it takes a lot of knowledge, and they come at it from the point of view of being a tremendous supportive resource for the families, because it's a big job to support somebody through an addiction.
Absolutely. Dale, thank you so much for putting these resources together for us. These will be tools that I know many of us will use throughout the next few days, few months, few years. They will be tools that we can share with everyone. So like I had mentioned before, those slides will be sent along with the recording of this. I have one more question for Dale before we're going to get to your questions. So if you have any questions, please make sure you put them in the Q&A box. They are anonymous, and I will have the great pleasure of asking Dale these questions. But Dale, my next question and my last question for you is a heavy one, but I know we discussed this and we think it's important that we talk about this. Where does one turn to if they're having thoughts that are leading them towards self-harm or to suicide?
You're right. We talked about this prior to the session today, and you're right. I think it's a really important topic. I think we have to start a conversation in the agricultural community around suicide and self-harm, because so many of us in this community are heading towards the path, and unfortunately have taken this have committed suicide, ended our lives because the pain that we were experiencing was too great, and this was the way to find relief or to end that pain. And we have to open up a conversation about that as people in agriculture, because we're more affected than most other communities in Canada. And I say that generally speaking as a community. We're like 45% higher. I think a study in 2016 found 45% higher rates of suicide and self-harm. So it's a really important topic. There are some early warning signs that we should be aware of. We want to talk about a person who might be isolating, someone who is expressing a sense of hopelessness about their situation, about how they feel about that situation. Again, significant changes in sleeping and eating behavior, big emotional swings, unexplained physical changes, sudden losses of weight, for instance. And then there's the sort of the move towards, right, an end of life decision, where that might be giving away possessions, substance abuse, talking about ending it, like asking questions like, well, how would you feel if I wasn't here anymore? Or I'm thinking about, oh, I don't know if I'll be here for next planting, or I don't know if I'll make it through Christmas. Those kinds of ideation and talking out loud is usually the person in their mind preparing themselves or heading down that road. It's really important that we don't shut that down. That we're not afraid of that, but that we mark it as this is a person who's heading towards a path, a way of thinking that self-harm and suicide is an option for them. Drastic changes in sleep patterns. And then the last, usually before the unfortunate events, are seeking means. So that could be someone who's obtaining pills or weapons or other potentially dangerous things. Again, men tend to end their life in a way more violent way. Women tend to end their life with combinations of alcohol or pills, that kind of thing, less violent than men do. So we kind of talk about it because even in the moment, and I've worked with people who have been on this path. Even in the moment, the emotional logic that my only opportunity for relief is to end my life. That emotional logic is really powerful in a person's mind. It's not something you can shut down. It's not something you can necessarily dissuade them from. What you have to do is you have to find ways to support them through pointing them, like even accompanying them to getting support and treatment. And that's usually the first thing, like being there, being by their side, being a safe person that they can actually talk to and help unpack. You have to understand that a person who's on that path is very much alone in their own thoughts, and their thoughts scare them. And so them having the opportunity to talk it out and talk it out loud is a really powerful way of showing support. Setting firm boundaries, especially around self-harm, right? We see a lot of this when it comes to cutting behaviors, burning behaviors, things like that. Setting boundaries around hurting oneself, not necessarily through punishment, but through showing the person that how much we care about them and how it makes us feel when we see them hurt themselves, and trying to open up a conversation with them about the feelings connected to the hurt or the pain. These are powerful ways that we really need to start addressing this as a community. I would love to see, because so many of us inside of agriculture are affected by this, I would love to see us as a community somehow come together and really address this as a topic. Farming is hard enough. We don't need to make it harder by losing great people.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dale. That was well said. And coming together and making this a topic that we are open to talking about, even though it's hard. We have to do it because we are here to support one another, and we are here to make sure that we are as good and healthy as we can be. So I want to get to the questions that have been asked here. So one of the questions that came in is, do you have any words of reassurance for someone who feels like they've tried everything to convince a loved one to seek treatment for a mental health issues? At a certain point, it feels like all I can do is give up.
And I totally understand that. I think this is a great question, because when we're all going to reach limits. We're all going to reach our the end of the road for us when we just don't feel like we can continue to care or to continue to push this individual in a way or coax this individual towards change. The only reassurance that I think we can give that I can give you is that it might be slow and it might seem like you're not making any significant change, but to persist in caring about the individual and to keep letting them know how this is affecting you, not from a judgment place, not from a punishing place, but from a, I hurt when I see you do this. I feel really sad when I feel helpless in trying to get you to see this. It's a way of showing that you care, that doesn't make the person feel ashamed or makes them feel defensive. And I'm going to add one more caveat here because I think it's a critical one. Caring for an individual and supporting them in their trying to get them to change in terms of their mental health, when that starts to sabotage your own mental health, the focus needs to change. We can't help another if our own mental health is being sabotaged or compromised, if we're losing track or our own mental health is deteriorating. We need to, at that point, we need to take care of ourselves in order to care for someone else. And sometimes that involves putting up a pretty firm boundary. So the reassurance that I want to offer you is that persistence does pay off. And it's a type of caring persistence that pays off. And even when your own mental health needs addressing because it's been deteriorating as you've been caring for this person, you modeling taking care of yourself is a very powerful signal to that person about how important mental health and the relationship is. That's a really powerful thing to do.
That answers a multitude of questions that were asked here. So good job for, two birds, one stone, many stones, one bird. We have another one here. And I don't know if you're going to have the specific answer for this, but I think you can speak from experience in the many years that you've worked with individuals through coaching and mentorship and counseling. We've had this conversation, Dale. There are so many more resources now, specifically around agriculture, than there ever has been when it comes to mental health resources and getting the help that we need. The question is, do we have any idea if these programs are actually helping producers, and are they accessing them, and how are they making a difference? I'm just going to speak for myself as a first generation farmer who came into this industry a lot later than a lot of you. The amount of conversations that I've seen in the last number of years around mental health has been outstanding. I didn't know these conversations needed to be had until I got here, but the more and more that we talk about it, I know from personal experience, it's making a difference for me. And I know from other farmers that I've talked to, whether that's in person or on the podcast, these conversations make a difference. And for me, for you to show up here today, you yourself are making a difference.
It's an interesting question, though, right? And I appreciate how you answered that. It's a really interesting question, and I'm wondering if the person who sent the question in is experiencing some hesitancy. Like, is it worth the effort?
Right.
Is it worth the effort to find out more information? Is it worth the effort to take the steps? Is it worth the effort to engage in a what might be life-changing in terms of turning my mental health around? And I can only I'll speak not only as a professional, but also somebody who got into working with people in terms of mental health. because I have my own issues at one point in my life. The difference in the quality of my life, once I committed to figuring out why I was thinking the way I was thinking, why I was feeling the way I was feeling, and certainly why I was doing some of the destructive things that I was doing to myself. The change in the quality of my life was beyond anything I could have imagined when I was in it. And I think that's the outstanding experience that many people have once they get to the other side. So is it worth going down the journey? It absolutely is worth going down the journey. And yes, these programs do work. And are producers taking advantage of them? Yeah. Could we have more producers taking advantage of them? Absolutely. Could we have more producers talking to each other about the real things that are happening in terms of their mental health and how they really feel? And would all those conversations help us? Yes, yes, and yes. This is the path through. We've tried isolation. We've tried shaming. We've tried suck it up, buttercup. We've tried this is just what it is, get over it or get off the farm. And that has not worked. We've tried those things. So let's try something different. Let's do what other industries and sectors are doing, like law enforcement, like first responders, like PTSD survivors. Let's learn from what works in those communities, and let's start helping ourselves.
Dale, that was a mic drop answer. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. You have provided so much information for us here today, and I just cannot thank you enough. As a special thank you for all of those who participated in the Q&A, we would like to extend a special thank you and provide you with a little surprise. So Dale has generously offered a copy of his book, Living Lightly. I even have my prop here with me, Dale, my own personal copy signed from Dale. So Dale has provided these, and for those who participated in the Q&A, FCC will be reaching out to you and asking for your mailing address via email. So stay tuned for that email. Check your junk inbox just in case it went there. But Dale, that is all of the time that we have today. And I want to say thank you. Thank you again.
You're very welcome, Katelyn. It's so awesome to get to hang with you again. It's this is a topic that I know is dear to both of us. And I really appreciate the tone and how open you made this conversation and easy you made this conversation. Thank you so much.
You're an easy guy to talk to, Dale. So thank you again. So friends, you will receive the resources that were shared today, as well as a link to the recording of this presentation. Please feel free to keep it for yourself. Please share it to friends and loved ones who you think need to hear these messages as well. You're also going to be receiving an event evaluation to your inbox. So please fill out the evaluation, as this helps the fine folks at FCC plan for future events for farmers like us. On behalf of FCC, thank you so much for joining me here today with Dale. We really appreciate it and hope you have a great day.